Welcome to the video, guys. In a follow-up to my video from yesterday, the BBC were back at it again this morning. This time, it was everyone's favourite Ramona and the BBC's #1 dirty smear merchant, Victoria Derbyshire.
Jeremy Cunt. I'm so sorry, Jeremy Hunt. I've never said that before in my life. It's usually men who say that.
You might remember her shows last year, mostly surrounding Brexit and, of course, Donald Trump's visit, where she had the blimp inside the studio with her, showing her complete impartiality to each political side. Well, she has continued that trend this morning during an interview with former Labour leader and warmonger Tony Blair. Now, it's not often you will find me agreeing with Tony Blair, and it kind of makes me feel sick to do so, but in this situation, for the most part, I have to. Victoria does her best to get Tony Blair to criticise the government in their response to the coronavirus, which he refuses to do, and even praises them in some cases. You can tell during the interview itself, which lasts for nearly 20 minutes, that she is getting more and more frustrated that Tony Blair is not saying what she likely expected him to, because his institute released a paper this morning that obviously her or her team has read and taken as a criticism of the government, when actually it's not. So after getting her show cancelled in January this year, this old dog is back onto her old tricks, likely because she's pretty salty at the government. The cancellation of her show by the BBC is likely to do with the government's stance on the BBC, considering the complete and utter bias that they have shown over the last few years. So enough of me waffling, let's go over a couple of clips from the interview. We're not going to go over all of it because it's too long and there's no need to.
Let's talk now to the former Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who joins us. Good morning to you, Mr. Blair.
Good morning.
Now, the government has said repeatedly it won't talk about how it might go about easing lockdown restrictions because it risks, they say, confusing the message of staying at home. Do you think it does?
I think we can handle both discussions. By the way, the government's completely right in saying that you've got to make sure that this suppression phase is effective and works, and it would be crazy, obviously, to end it prematurely. On the other hand, the economic and indeed health damage that the severity of the lockdown is causing means that, again, obviously, the sooner we can responsibly ease restrictions, the better. And the paper that my institute's put out today is not a criticism of the government at all. It's what I would say is constructive advice as to the types of issues that government's got to deal with when you come to easing the lockdown. And then it suggests how you reposition government to deal with every aspect of this because it's so extraordinarily complex and difficult.
So the first clip was her determination to find out how the government plans to get us out of lockdown, which everyone would like to know, but in my opinion really wouldn't be beneficial for the general population to know. She obviously expected Tony Blair to come out here and attack the government, when in actual fact he did the complete opposite and actually said this situation is an extremely difficult and complicated one to deal with, which I think you will agree says to me he is not envying the government's current position in dealing with this situation. Because either way, they are going to get criticised, but he is not going to jump on the bandwagon and give the BBC what they want here. Which, like I said, makes me feel sick to say, but is the right thing to do. It's not often you hear me saying that in regards to Tony Blair, but in this case I have to. Now let's move on, because this dopey bin is persistent if she is anything.
But it's clear from what you're saying, you don't see it, as some reportedly do, as a choice between lives versus livelihoods. The two are absolutely interlinked.
Yeah, they're absolutely interlinked, that's right, because the fact is, I mean, directly right now, I suspect there are many people with, if you like, what you might call sort of the normal run of conditions. It might be heart, stroke, cancer, and so on. Many of those won't be receiving the priority treatment they probably need. That's understandable, but it's a fact. But also, if you create lasting economic and social damage, and the other thing my report shows is it's the poorest parts of the population that will suffer most from this because they've often the least secure jobs, then the damage and pressure on your healthcare system is also going to be enormous. So the lives versus livelihoods choice, I think, is a false one. The government, let me make it clear, it's right to suppress right now. You've got to keep the lockdown in place. But that's why you need a massive amount of work in order to prepare for easing it in the most responsible way. The other thing, by the way, Victoria, is that we will be able to learn from other countries. So some countries in Europe are already opening up. You've got a lot of lessons, I think, from places like South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, who started to ease. So there's a great deal of evidence that we can draw on. And then, of course, you've got to absolutely out for things like therapeutics that you were just discussing, new treatments that may become available, because the vaccine may be, it's still to tell, the vaccine may be still a long way off.
The only people that see it as lives versus livelihood is the BBC, because they know they can use that as a political stick to beat the government with, in what looks like to me, a campaign against the government to turn public opinion against them, when, for the most part, the public actually supports the government, with, last I checked, the highest approval ratings going. But these BBC shitweasels are so bent out of shape because of everything that's happened over the last few months, they are determined to use this situation as a political football against the current government, as are obviously the current Labour Party. Though the former Labour leader here is not, which is probably more shocking to venereal disease here, that he is not joining with the rest of the Labour Party in taking full advantage of this situation. I mean, you heard him say it there, the lives versus livelihood debate is a false one created by the media. He doesn't say created by the media, but we know that's what he means, because guess who has been creating the narrative around a lot of things surrounding the coronavirus? The media. 24-hour a day propaganda pump out has been seen from the BBC on this story in the last 2 months at least. But once again in that clip, you hear Tony Blair backing the government's decisions, which is not what this BBC bint wants. And doesn't really matter if Tony Blair is right or not, it's just funny to me to watch this idiot not get what she wants out of this interview. There was obviously an aim before it, like I said, and it's not going to plan. It's always great news if you ask me. You might notice towards the end of that clip though, when he starts talking about other countries opening up the lockdown and how we can learn from that, which is once again backing the government's decision on this, the BBC magically has technical issues. That was not an issue with my recording you heard there at the end. That was literally the BBC, which I have to admit is baffling to me that they cannot keep a stable signal. I can keep a stable signal with someone talking to them via voice or video chat without issue from my home, without the millions of pounds worth of equipment that the BBC has at its disposal. So in my opinion, that could very well have been the BBC fucking up the connection there, or it could well have been just a connection issue with the McDonald's Wi-Fi. But let's move on to the next clip. We got a couple more left to look at.
The Sunday Times reported yesterday that Boris Johnson missed 5 Cobra virus meetings in January and February. Michael Gove said yesterday that wasn't fair reporting because a Prime Minister doesn't routinely attend all those meetings. They're led by the relevant Secretary of State, who would then report to the Prime Minister. From your experience, is that fair?
Look, I don't, I've tried to avoid going back over what's happened in the past because, that gets you into criticism of the government. I just don't want to be in that game because I know how difficult it is for all of them. And, people ask me, were there any Cobra meetings you ever missed? And the frank answer is I can't remember at this distance of time. Obviously, if you have Cobra, it's because it's a serious emergency. But I'm sure the government, the people in government will be doing everything they possibly can. I think the most important thing is not, who's doing their job well and who's doing it badly. It's whether you have the right combination of skills at the centre of government to handle some of these things. So if you take, for example, protective equipment, that's gowns and masks and the things that the frontline medical staff need and the things, by the way, that we all may need as we go back to work. That is, yes, of course, you need the government system, but that is a skill that is better found in the private sector than it is in the public sector. So, that's my issues are really around how you position government, not, going back over who should have attended what meeting. I mean, we can get to all that at a later stage. Right now, I think we've just got to focus on the future.
When all else fails, try to call Boris Johnson incompetent and, like the leftist shitweasels on Twitter, make out like he's not doing his job properly. The desperation from this woman is incredible. And it goes to show how low she is when she tries to ask Tony Blair to remember back if he had ever missed a Cobra meeting, which he doesn't entertain. So, once again, I have to make myself feel sick and say, well done to him. Even though I despise the guy with a passion, it's good to see someone not taking advantage of the BBC's attempts to smear the government, and anyone else for that matter, that they disagree with, which we all know is something they love to do, along with the rest of the lamestream media. I mean, you actually see the cringe when he goes to answer the question, which shows how low and dirty it actually is. He says about the Cobra meeting question though, that he can't remember. I expect he can remember, but the best answer is just to say he can't remember, so he remains neutral on the situation. He's not here to political point score, which is surprising, but a welcome thing, considering what has been going on recently. My video yesterday, for example, the BBC had Labour councillors on there, plus their own editors, who were literally just talking nonsense and pushing Labour Party points. And my video yesterday also missed out the Union Chief that was on the BBC just before that clip that I showed you in my video yesterday. So you can be sure at least half an hour of the BBC's runtime consecutively yesterday was taken up by Labour talking points. They tried to do it again this morning with Victoria Derbyshire, but Tony Blair, it seems, did not rise to the challenge, so once again, well done him. I'm going to have to throw up after this video. I mean, I would say it's surprising the way the BBC and the venereal disease here are acting, but to be honest, nothing surprises me with them. Take a look at their Brexit coverage, them running around acting like this in relation to the coronavirus should obviously be no surprise to anyone. But I still think it's funny that Tony Blair didn't give her what she wanted, and instead outright refused to criticise the government and even pointed out to her dumb ass that his paper released today was not a criticism of the government, it was trying to actually help them. Though I don't agree that the Tony Blair Institute should be helping anyone. I thought it was right to point out the BBC's shitweasel behaviour here. I will tell you what though, once this situation is over, the government really needs to deal with the BBC and media in general. Because at the moment, I consider them worse than the disease that is causing this shit show to occur. Now before I go, I've started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you would like to come and join me for a live stream to chat in real time, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or just want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link will be down in the video description below and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now as always, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.